My name is Kim Daniels, and I'm with Georgetown University's Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. We're so glad to be hosting this dialogue in cooperation with Cardinal Peter Turkson and the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development. And the dialogue is on Laudato Si after 5 years, hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Before we get started, we have to recognize what a tragic week it's been here in the United States in so many ways. We'd like to take a moment to say a prayer together for George Floyd and all those who suffer from acts of racism and injustice, and for all those who are suffering because of the COVID-19 crisis. So with thanks to Jane Barron for much of this prayer, please join me. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. We hear words of racism, fear, and anger in our communities. We see acts of terrible injustice and loss of life in our streets. We cry out to you, O Lord, to deliver us from the evils of racism that cause pain and anguish, dividing our nation. In your mercy, O Lord, deliver us from these evils so that our communities can be renewed by the rejection of all racism and prejudice, all violence, with a new awareness of the dignity of all God's children, and with deep respect for every human person, so that the healing bonds of solidarity can grow and the common good can flourish. We pray too for all those who suffer from the economy of exclusion and a throwaway culture that fails to care for all our sisters and brothers and for our common home. We pray for all those who suffer from the COVID-19 pandemic, for those who have died, for all those who love them, and for all those who have lost their jobs, their health, their family members, their peace. For all this we pray together. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for joining me with that. And thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome all of you to this discussion. We're so grateful to have so many of you coming together to join us during this challenging time. Over 1,600 people have RSVP'd from around the country and the world to talk today about Laudato Si in our common home. And I think it makes this conversation one of the examples of the kind of connectedness among the people of God that Pope Francis talks about in Laudato Si. I want to particularly hold up the work of the so many religious sisters who are here joining us today. Your work is something that makes all of us proud. We're also joined by so many from Catholic ministries and dioceses and schools, by advocates and activists, by teachers and students, by lay Catholics living out our faith, and by our non-Catholic friends who share our concern for our common home. Thanks to each one of you for joining us and being a part of this conversation. We'll have an opportunity for questions and answers later on, so please send any questions to the email that you'll see on the bottom of your screen below. Share your thoughts on social media if you can, using the hashtag Laudato Si5, and by tagging the initiative at GUCST Public Life on Twitter. Now, finally, I'd like to thank Cardinal Peter Turkson, who worked closely with Pope Francis on Laudato Si as the head of the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development, and who now heads the Vatican's COVID-19 Commission, for asking if we could work together to raise up the importance of Laudato Si on its 5th anniversary. Cardinal Turkson, welcome. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the importance of Laudato Si after 5 years.
Thank you. And well, on behalf of the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development, we want to thank President Joya of Georgetown, John Carla and his team for this initiative of Catholic social thought and policy for making all of this possible. So, dear friends, I know, as has been said, that you're in for a very wonderful treat this afternoon. You're going to be hearing very erudite presentations and engaging thoughts on Laudato Si. But let me begin by just opening up the document a little bit for you. You know, the central theme or message of Laudato Si is integral ecology. Integral ecology, intentionally so. And I just want to briefly present it to you on the 7 C's, the letter C as in Charles, to just help you get some, feeling into this. The central theme of integral ecology is actually the result of a lot of teaching by previous popes. Pope Paul VI, in his encyclical Populorum Progressio, drew our attention to the need to care for the environment of nature, natural ecology. And this was followed up by Pope John Paul II, who drew our attention to the need also to recognize that the human person also has an ecology, an environment of moral conditions and moral habits and deeds to be recognized, to make him live successfully. Then Pope Benedict XVI in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, took this one more steps further and said, we also need to recognize that society itself also has an environment that needs to be respected. And then even peace. For peace to reign, we need also to recognize this environment. So when we put all of this together, we have environment of nature, we have environment of the human person and all of that. So integral ecology is both ecology of nature, ecology of the human person, ecology of society, ecology of peace. All of that put together make integral ecology. So we say that the teaching integral ecology is in continuity with the teaching of Popes. That's the first C. The second C is something that we also, all who have looked at Laudato Si, would notice. The Pope does not simply quote from scripture and from past popes, but he quotes a lot from what local episcopal conferences have done. He quotes as if he's saying that he wants to write encyclical with bishops around the world. Well, this makes us talk about encyclical as if it was written in collegiality with other bishops. Now, if the encyclical was written in collegiality with other bishops, I mean, the Pope referring to what bishops have also said, then once it's published, it's up to bishops to come on board with the promotion and the teaching of the message of Laudato Si. Then there is also the crucial feature of conversation or dialogue, which is crucial about this encyclical. Pope Francis says that he wants to talk with everybody living on this earth and invite everybody to a dialogue. It's as if we face a common crisis. Come, let us think together. And thinking together, find solutions for this crisis. So conversation, dialogue, is a third feature of this encyclical. And then if it's a dialogue or conversation, then the question is about what? What are we conversing or dialoguing about? And it is care, C-A-R-E, care for our common home, care for the earth. A lot of people who deal with ecology and environment talk about stewardship and safeguarding. The encyclical talks about stewardship only twice. The rest of the time, the Pope talks about the need to care. Because when you care about something, it's more passionate, it's more central, it's more personal and with your heart. So that's what the Pope wants us to do. Care for the earth and care for the very its people and all that belong to it. This is the fourth C. And to enable us to care for the environment and everything that exists, Pope Francis is saying that from the present crisis as we experience it now, we cannot live this care unless we went through a conversion, unless we decided to change our way of life, our style, and our way of doing things. So then the encyclical also talks about ecological conversion. The need for all of us to change habits, to change ways of doing things, to change how we treat Mother Earth so that the earth can experience the care that we need to show for it. And then the Pope then, as a kind of Jesuit teacher at one point, knows that, but we cannot have people do conversion unless they are motivated. And to motivate people to have ecological conversion or to change style of life, the Pope said we need education. Education for integral ecological citizenship. So education for ecological citizenship is what the Pope presents as a way of motivating people to accept, to change their way of life and their conduct, to acquire new habits so that the care for creation can take place and happen. This is the sixth C. And the last and the seventh C is contemplation. This encyclical begins with a prayer. Laudato Si, praise be to you, O God. And it concludes also with a prayer. And the model that the Pope cites in this encyclical is St. Francis of Assisi, the saint who used to talk to creatures and who would advise the brothers not to prune every tree bare so that the other friars, seeing the work of nature, can begin to think about God and to worship God. So that is contemplation. So these are the seven, as it were, signposts of the encyclical. It's a teaching in continuity with the past bishops. It's a teaching with bishops around the world, collegiality. It's a teaching done in conversation, dialogue with every one of us. And it is about care for our common home in the midst of this crisis that we live in. And this care invites us to change, ecological conversion. And ecological conversion is possible when people are motivated to change. So education to ecological citizenship. And the end of it all is, let's raise our minds and hearts, looking at the beauty of creation, to recognize God, the creator, to praise and glorify him. So these are the 7 C's with which I wanted to begin this conversation. And hopefully you can also go away with 7. Being a Catholic, you talk about 7 sacraments, 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. So here are 7 C's. On Sunday, when you celebrate the gift of Pentecost, remember the 7 C's of Laudato Si and try to live with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cardinal Turkson. What a helpful way to think about Laudato Si. That's wonderful. Laudato Si has had such a significant impact here at Georgetown. We've watched it over the past 5 years now. We've had, first of all, a Laudato Si professor of biology and the environment, and a Laudato Si fund for innovative student projects on care for creation. And our initiative and our director, John Carr, have been involved in 2 additional major steps forward here at Georgetown in implementing Laudato Si. Care for our common home is being added to the spirit of Georgetown, which is our expression of the university's Catholic mission and Jesuit identity. And last February, the board of the university took the lead and voted to divest from fossil fuel companies. And Georgetown is just one place that's trying to implement Pope Francis's call to care for creation and care for our common home.
Sure.
So now I'd like to bring in our other participants. Joining us today, along with Cardinal Sir Turkson, are Dan Misla, the founder and director of the Catholic Climate Covenant, Kim Wasserman, the executive director of the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization in Chicago, Dr. Christiana Zenner, associate professor of theology, science, and ethics in the Department of Theology at Fordham University. Thank you all for being here. Cardinal Turkson, let me return to you for a moment. A central theme of this encyclical is to bring together an environmental ethic with the pursuit of social and economic justice, to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. What does that require of us today? How does it challenge us? How does it challenge the environmental movement, the church, each one of us? And in particular, how does it challenge us during this time of a global pandemic and an economic crisis?
Exactly, what it is. I mean, if as Pope John Paul, Pope Paul VI already invited us to do in 1967 when he wrote his encyclical Populum Progressio, to recognize that when we talk about ecology, what really we're talking about is a set of conditions which constitute an environment which enables something to thrive. Okay, so all of it is about maintaining and constructing an environment which enables things to thrive. So if we're talking about natural, justice or ecological justice, what we're talking about is the need to maintain an environment which enables the work of creation, everything in there to thrive. And that means we need to respect the water bodies, the forests, the trees, and all of that, so that these can thrive. And related with this, if we've seen natural ecology, the other thing that followed quickly from John Paul II was human ecology, the social conditions in which we live in, the type of social structures and social systems which enable people. You just started this inviting us to prayer about what has just happened in Minneapolis. What is that? It's just a cry for people to recognize that every human being requires a minimum of social conditions to enable him to live and live successfully and happily. That's what social ecology is all about. And when this is not there, and when the earth is abused, then the Pope says that 2 elements are crying to us, inseparably, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. These are 2 cries which are reaching to us basically because what they need to constitute a thriving, prosperous environment is denied them. And that's why we talk about justice. So it's an invitation for us to recognize that we all need to contribute to creating an environment in which both nature and human beings will thrive. And that's what it's all about.
Thanks so much for that. I want to turn now to Christiana, Dr. Christiana Zenner. Christy, you're a theologian who's focused on environmental ethics in your academic work. You've written on and thought carefully about Laudato Si. You and I met each other 5 years ago when this was issued, when this wonderful call to action was issued. And I've learned so much from you. And in listening to Cardinal Turkson, I hear so much of your work reflected in the way he's talking about this important call to action. Can you tell us a little bit about what was so new and distinctive about this encyclical? Help us unpack this idea of a social ecology that Cardinal Turkson referenced. What's been the most important, crucial contribution for Laudato Si? And finally, what do you have to say to people who have a hard time seeing ecological issues as central to Catholic thought?
Those are great questions, Kim, and thank you for having me. And also, it's lovely to be in conversation with you all. Cardinal Turkson, you took some of my talking points,
Sorry,
but that's okay.
that.
No, it's a good thing. So this document is so interesting. And when I introduce it to students now, having taught it for 5 years and sat with it and read it in many iterations, I say there are just so many things that are continuous with Catholic social teaching, as Cardinal Turkson nicely articulated. Previous popes, going back to Paul VI, had spoken about the importance of the environment, its links to integral development, concern for the poorest among us. But what is really new, I think, about Laudato Si is that it intertwines and links those prior threads to create an amplification that almost makes it a difference in kind. So there is continuity, but there is also a centralization of ecological questions, with ecology being understood, yes, as environmental, but also as deeply social, as deeply relational, and as deeply moral, pertaining to the structures that govern our lives, implicitly or explicitly. So concerns about economy, the Pope's concerns about economies of extraction and profit that exclude majorities of humans, the Pope's concerns about the ways in which throwaway culture or the devaluation of life in the United States, of course, we've seen this very recently with regard to the tragic death of George Floyd. And I can't help but remember back to 5 years ago when we were first meeting over this document. And I'm struck by the framing of racial violence as a symptom of problems in our social ecology and our social fabric. Because 5 years ago, when the bishops were having their first press conference, the US bishops, about Laudato Si, it was the day after the Charleston church shootings. So we are beset by pandemics that are social, racial, gun-mediated. We are beset by pandemics of economic inequality, and we are beset by pandemics that are viral in nature, really bringing truth to the point that we are all connected, and that the dimensions, the ways of our relating to each other matter so very much. So for me, at least, that core message, which was radical at the time, remains accosting and remains so. As a scholar, I have a few other things that are really striking about this encyclical, and this is one point that Cardinal Turkson mentioned. Taking recourse to bishops' conferences, looking at experiences on the ground in other parts of the world, what other bishops' conferences have written. This isn't normal for papal encyclicals, which tend to be a little higher, 30,000 feet above the air. And so, scholar friends of mine have written articles about, oh my goodness, if you just look at the footnotes, this is a radical document because look who he's citing. I wish that perhaps some sisters, women religious, and the major efforts that they have done could have been amplified a little more, but I think that's the ongoing work of the church, and I'm glad, Kim, that you signaled that. And so I guess to conclude, what is the impact of this document among Catholic theologians? What might we say to those who still have a hard time seeing ecological issues as connected to Catholic teaching? I would say that ecology is not just about environment, but we humans are not separate from the environments we inhabit. And just as climate change is not only a phenomenon of science or industrialized nations, so too ecology it permeates everything. The effects of the ecologies, the way we live our lives collectively, can be seen in so many manifestations. And that, I think, is a message that is not just ethical, it's also deeply anthropological. Who do we understand ourselves to be and be beholden to and be related to?
Thank you so much, Christiana. That was wonderful. And I, too, share your appreciation of the way in which Laudato Si reaches out to so many different parts of the Catholic Church in terms of where Pope Francis draws his sources and how he brings so many people into that conversation. I want to turn now to our next participant, Dan Misla, who is the founder and executive director of the Catholic Climate Covenant. I encourage all of you to join the Covenant if you haven't already. It's a wonderful organization. I am a part of it myself. And Dan has just been a leader on these issues for years here in the United States. He was a leader in helping get Laudato Si out in public conversation at the time it was introduced, and that's when I first got to know Dan. Dan, I want to ask you a question. Pope Francis is focused in Laudato Si on the need for understanding and dialogue and action on the various dimensions of environmental challenges that we face. Where are we 5 years later? And can you tell us a little bit more about the differences it's making on the ground? What needs to be done right now? And in particular, how might Laudato Si help us think about shaping a response to our pandemic that we're in right now?
Well, thank you, Kim, and thanks for inviting me. This is quite an esteemed panel, and then you also added me, so I'm grateful. Yeah, so Laudato Si after 5 years, I mean, I think a lot has been done, a lot has happened. We have, the Covenant counts about 500 parish creation care teams. That number was about 100 before Laudato Si, so quite an increase. We're in dialogue with about 24 diocesan creation care teams, folks who gathered around in a diocese to try to encourage their diocesan staff and leaders to do more around creation care. Several dioceses have really stepped up. I think of Stockton and Atlanta. I think of Cincinnati and Columbus, San Diego. I'm sure there are others. Laudato Si was also the inspiration for our Catholic Energies program, which we began about the same time that Laudato Si came out, which helps Catholic institutions, Catholic facilities do energy efficiency and solar energy. At the beginning of this year, we turned on a 2 megawatt solar system for Catholic Charities here in DC, the largest ground-based array in the district. It now saves hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for Catholic Charities just in electric costs, which that money can then go to feed the hungry, house the homeless, counsel the lost. It's also, these types of projects are also a great witness to the wider community, showing that the church does care, that the church is taking action. I think that's an important witness, particularly for our young people. Several state Catholic conferences have also issued statements. I think of California and Minnesota, and just this past week, Michigan. Our 19 national Catholic partners have stepped up, creating curricula, going to Capitol Hill to lobby on behalf of Care for Creation issues. Women Religious, which has already been mentioned, they're continuing their work that's been going on for decades, and we're enormously grateful for them. The Bishops' Conference, too, has really pushed back hard on the administration for a lot of the environmental rollbacks, and also for pulling out of the Paris Agreement, which is just a real tragedy. But I want to flip your second question around, because I want to say, how might Laudato Si help shape? You asked how can it help shape a response to the pandemic, but I'd like to say, how can the pandemic help shape a response to Laudato Si? I think we need to step it up, just like we have with the pandemic. I worry sometimes that ideology and apathy, including in our own church sometimes, has slowed the efforts that we need to address the climate crisis. I fear that it's still seen by many as a quaint issue, rather than the core of our Christian tradition. Pope Francis in paragraph 217 says, living our vocation to be protectors of God's handiwork is essential to a life of virtue. It is not an optional or secondary aspect of our Christian experience. The pandemic also teaches us that science should rule the day. We have experts going back decades who have told us that the climate crisis is upon us, that we need to address it. It's a slow-moving pandemic, but it's a pandemic nonetheless. And we also know that, like the pandemic, the climate crisis is hitting the poor the first and the hardest. So we have to remember that is also a big part of the lessons that we're trying to learn from the pandemic.
Thanks so much, Dan. And thanks so much for all your good work and the work of those who help you. I now want to turn to Kim Wasserman. We're so grateful that you took the time to be here with us, Kim. And for all of you out there watching, I just want you to know one thing we try to do here at the initiative is always be sure that we have someone who's working on the ground on these issues directly in our conversations. And we are so proud and happy to have Kim Wasserman here with us today. Kim leads the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, which led local residents in a successful campaign to shut down 2 of the country's oldest and dirtiest coal plants in Chicago. And she's now helping transform Chicago's old industrial sites into parks and multi-use spaces. Kim, tell us your story and the story of your community. How was Little Village affected by pollution? How did residents work together for change? And how has Catholic teaching and Pope Francis' leadership on this issue affected your efforts?
Absolutely. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Kim Wasserman again, and very honored to be a part of this conversation. The Little Village community is on the southwest side of Chicago, about 95,000 people strong, in a very small area. We live in about 5 miles of radius, so a lot of people in a very dense area. And from inception as an organization, we were going out door to door. We were hearing a lot of folks in our neighborhood talk about how they felt that something was wrong with the air quality. A lot of immigrants in our community who came from Mexico and South and Central America, who never had incidences of asthma, but now found themselves living in Little Village, and new generations were developing asthma and respiratory disease. And so when we looked around and saw that we had 2 coal power plants in our backyard, we said, well, this might be something. How does coal work? Where does it come from? How does it create electricity? And how does it impact us more at the end of the day? And so for us as a neighborhood, it was really important to trust our gut and to say, we think there's something here, and believe in each other and say, how do we find out? And so what ended up happening was a 12-year campaign. Once we understood how the coal power plants were affecting us, and more importantly, how nobody in our neighborhood worked there, but we received all of the impacts of the pollution coming out of the coal power plant. And while the smoke was white and unassuming, we understood how it was detrimentally impacting our health, with 40 premature deaths a year in our community every year just based on the coal power plant polluting. So for 12 years, we fought really, really hard, and we had the science, we had the proof, but even then we weren't able to connect to our politicians and say our lives are worth saving. Our community is worth saving. And more importantly, we want to see a different plan for this coal power plant. So in 2012, when they shut down and we were successful in shutting them down, it was a great relief to our community because we could finally breathe for the first time in our neighborhood. But unfortunately, capitalism and extraction and city entities believing that they know what's best for our communities continues to play out on the site. In 2017, we learned that the Hilco Corporation bought the coal power plant and was going to be putting a 1 million square foot warehouse for Target on the site, which meant hundreds of thousands of diesel trucks now coming through our neighborhood. And so community members once again said, this doesn't seem right. We see an influx of diesel in our community already. We're seeing a return of respiratory illness once again in our community. And more importantly, we're in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. Does it make sense to be building warehouses and lifting up trucks in a city like Chicago? And please note that what ended up happening was on Easter weekend, the Hilco Corporation got approval from the city of Chicago to demolish the smokestack in our community. There was no notice. There was less than 24-hour notice that was given to our community, and we were already in shelter in place. And so Saturday morning, Holy Saturday morning, at 10 in the morning, they imploded the coal power plant. And people had no idea. People were impacted by a huge plume of dust that expanded about 3 to 5 miles over the neighborhood. And since then, we have been in battle with the city and with Hilco, really trying to understand how would you approve a demolition during a pandemic, much less on Easter weekend in a very Catholic community that was already in shelter in place. Unfortunately, we lost the life of a senior in our neighborhood that next Sunday morning from respiratory issues as a result of the implosion. But for us as a community, particularly a community that very much is a Catholic community as well, when the encyclical came out, we were very surprised. I think for me, to hear folks in the hood talking about the encyclical and saying, wow, things that we've said, things that we believe in are being lifted up here. The fact that the coal power plant never employed us, the fact that we believe that we should be part of the conversation, that our folks should be employed in these spaces and have a voice, that there's dignity into our voice being heard, that we know what's best for our neighborhood. And so really, it was really exciting time for us to be able to build with the community around what do they see as an alternative to this warehouse? What would they want to see there for jobs? What kind of jobs would they want to see there? And so right now, it's really a battle with the city of Chicago around what our community wants to see on that site and what this company, Hilco, and the city have kind of in paying for the site on our behalf, in saying to us, well, warehouse jobs are what you need, truck driving jobs are what you need. And for us to push back and say, no, those are not currently jobs with dignity. Those are jobs that are getting exploited. Those are jobs that are pushing the economic conditions that we're seeing. And currently in the pandemic, we're seeing from Amazon to Walmart, right, workers being impacted by not being protected. So it's been a very exciting time for us to lift up the encyclical and really be able to talk about the fact that that we're not the only ones, that there's an entire community out there of folks who truly believe in the same things we believe in and believe that we have a right to say what happens in our community and a right to fight for what we should have and shouldn't have in our communities.
Thanks so much for that, Kim. And Cardinal Turkson, I wonder if we might turn to you and get your reaction first to the story of the Little Village neighborhood, this idea that communities should trust their gut and the clearly disproportionate impact of environmental degradation on poor communities and on people of color. It seems to me like it's a real illustration of what Pope Francis says, that we're faced not with two separate crises, but with a crisis that's both very complex, both social and environmental. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, you nearly right on the head. So, otherwise Pope Benedict would also have said the book of nature is one. It's both social and it's also, this ecological, this natural thing. I think that the thing that is good to know is that there's a lot of talk about ecology. And a lot of people think that ecology is just to be natural, to look at plants, to look at animals, to look at soil and all of that. It's not just that. When we talk about ecology and say that there's a natural ecology, human ecology, social, we're referring to a set of conditions which need to be in place to make everything thrive. If it's a human person, if it's social and all. And this means that we're referring and talking about those legislators, lawmakers, system policy formulators, whose instruments constitute the character and define the character of the environment in which we live. So lawmakers have a lot to do with the environment in which we live. Policymakers have a lot to do with the environment in which we live. So in a way, the environment is in a way created by us. And if we only recognize that the type of environment we create make people thrive or make people perish, then we'll probably have second thoughts on the legislations and the laws and everything that we make, which do not favor the growth of anything. Again, to turn to how you began this conversation with a story and driving us to Minneapolis and all of that and that. There is also the need to recognize that, there's a lot of talk within the same church about Christian nonviolence. Christian nonviolence is not only when you hold a gun or a knife to a throat of somebody. Christian nonviolence is also when you do not do violence to people's dignity, people's rights, and people's virtues and all. To tread upon foot the rights and the obligation and duties of people is also doing violence to them. So my big thing with all of this would be the word ecology is not something academic far away removed from us. It is the environment in which we live. And let us recognize that we all contribute to creating this environment, making it good and positive or making it bad and negative. And recognizing this, we would all appreciate how we can all play a role in maintaining and building up a very healthy environment, because that's what we all need to thrive and to be prosperous in what we do.
Thanks so much for that. And Dan, I wonder if I might turn to you just to follow up on that. When we think about what we can do where we are in our own particular places and circumstances, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what role model dioceses are doing, what strategies they're following, and how other dioceses or other ministries or other people might follow those examples.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Well, I think of the Diocese of Stockton. Actually, they've had an environmental justice coordinator in place for years now. And I know when Bishop Stephen Blair was the Bishop of Stockton, he was really pushing this. And they looked at air quality. So a lot of what Kim just talked about in the Central Valley of California, there are trucks moving up and down the freeway. There's when the days get really hot, there's an inversion layer that happens in the valley. And so they began to tackle the issue of how these communities are really suffering the high levels of asthma rates and things like that in the valley. But I also think of some smaller examples. Just recently, our first actually solar project was at a church called Immaculate Conception in Hampton, Virginia. And Father John Grace came to us a couple years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, because he was looking to do solar for his parish. And so we ended up helping him install 400 panels on the church. But it was more than just, him deciding that this was something that was important. He really brought the whole parish together to do that. Many meetings over many months to try to make sure that everybody was comfortable with this, to understand what was going to happen, how this whole system would work, what it would mean and what it has meant, which is about $16,000 a year in savings for their electric costs. They're using that to support their creation care team in the parish to do other projects similar to that. And as a result of Father John stepping out in the Diocese of Richmond, now we're working with about a half a dozen parishes and schools and administrative buildings in Richmond. So, I think a lot of people are hesitant to step into this because it's new, because it might be controversial. But I think once it starts to happen, people really begin to see that there's a really good way to move forward here. And I just can't help but think that our young people especially are looking for our church to lead on this. If we want young people to come back to the church, we have to at least have something along the lines of creation care. This is an issue that they care deeply about, and we should tap into their enthusiasm and energy and be a witness to them. And I think that's really important going forward.
Thanks so much for that, Dan. And Christiane, I wonder if you might pick up a little bit on that. First of all, obviously, you teach on a college campus or right now remotely, but you interact with young people all the time. I wonder if you might pick up on Dan's point about how young people react to this idea of care for creation and the intertwining of care for others and care for creation. And also maybe speak to what Cardinal Turkson said about Christian nonviolence being about doing justice to everybody, just to respecting everybody's dignity.
I love these topics and these questions, and I'm going to constrain my professorly tendency to speak in paragraphs for long amounts of time, but just know that there is so much to explore here. On the question of younger generations, I continue to be inspired by seeing the world through my students' eyes. These are so often young people who were born around the time or went to preschool around the time of September 11th, at least in the United States. These are obviously devastating and massive events in collective consciousness. Many of them suffered in myriad ways in a familial sense from the economic crisis of 2008. Now there are global pandemic considerations with, once again, the most vulnerable among us being disproportionately affected. And these are events that have shaped the psyches of so many of my students, and yet so many are not cynical. They believe that other worlds are possible because they are willing to name reality in ways that older generations are not. And so this debate, seemingly, about climate change that happens on the floors of Congress and in the halls of power is not even a debate. It's a given because it describes the reality that we inhabit. And so in that sense, even though Pope Francis is, in his 80s and is a celibate a pope, and so different from my students. They love that he released the encyclical bit by bit over Twitter, that it's addressed to everyone, and that it speaks of imagining collective goods that are not merely about what Pope Francis in the encyclical calls the magical conception of the market. And I think this is strikingly similar in many ways, presages in many ways what Greta Thunberg refers to as fairy tale ideas of market economics that fail to attend to the real embodied needs and dignities of people on this planet. And so perhaps that's a nice connection to the second part of your question, Kim, and a link to Cardinal Turkson's comment on Christian nonviolence. I had a very strong emotional, spiritual, physical reaction when you said that, Cardinal, because it's so true. What the requirements of nonviolence, the requirements of justice are not only about arresting in the sense of stopping, but also in a legal sense. They're not only about arresting explicit, acute wrongdoing. They're about providing the conditions. Nonviolence is about providing the conditions for flourishing, or for what you earlier called thriving. And that is a positive vision, a set of positive goods that I think many of us, certainly younger generations, and many of us in older generations want to support. And the question is how, and where do we begin, and how do we connect? And while I'm not one to necessarily look for silver linings in massive tragedies such as the ones that we are seeing, I do hope that our modes of connectivity digitally and in person, and the slowing down of time that many of us are experiencing right now, can be a way to reflect on those relationships and what sustains and what is needed to live a dignified human life.
Thank you, Christiana. That's wonderful. And I know for me and for our family, this really has been a time of slowing down and reflection. And I think we're all called to that. I want to turn now to questions that we're getting from the audience. We're getting so many questions in, and thank you so much for your engagement with this conversation. I want to start, and I'm going to direct this first to you, Kim, but I'd love for others to jump in on it as well, because I think it's so important. This comes from two friends of ours, from Bishop Economies, who was formerly the Bishop of Tucson, and also from a similar question from our friend Lonnie Ellis, who heads the Catholic nonprofit communications firm In Solidarity. And they say, clearly, First Bishop Economies says, clearly climate change has polarized positions. We have people, climate deniers, and those who are seeking solutions to climate change. How can we seek to draw out of these two opposed positions a new clarity, and not to get to a compromised position, but to get to some new insights? And then Lonnie follows up on that question in a very similar vein by asking, how do we deal with this problem of polarization? How do we deal with people coming from different places and create a healthy Catholic engagement with politics on this issue in particular? Kim, why don't we start with you, since you looked at this in a particular community, and I'm sure you had to arrive at some sort of a bringing people together in order to achieve the kinds of results that you've achieved. Can you talk about that on the ground, and then we'll look to others as well?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Thank you so much. For us, it's really about we're not in the business to try to convince people of anything. We're in the business of sharing facts and sharing what the reality on the ground is. And so that's why we really rely on, I think somebody talked earlier about the need for science. That's why we do our own community science, because we want to be able to understand for ourselves. We do our own air sampling, we do our own water sampling, we do our own soil sampling, because we know that the institutions to be the policymakers, the lawmakers that were referred to earlier, don't necessarily trust us. They don't believe us. They don't believe that we know what we're talking about. We don't speak English. We don't come from this country. We don't have documentation to be here. And so what could we possibly know about these things? And so really it's about, one, presenting the facts and presenting the science and letting folks decide for themselves. But the second thing that's equally as important is it's not about running around just pissing people off for the sake of pissing them off, right? It's about talking about the root causes, right? We didn't get here by chance, right? How did capitalism, how does racism, right? How do the structures that be allow us to get here? Where does redlining play into this, right? Where does predatory lending play into this? Where does the experimentation on women of color's bodies play into this? And just really owning the history so that people can understand that while you may not believe in climate change, you're worried about how you're going to put food on your table, right? And making the interconnection between the jobs in our community and what's being offered to us and what you need to survive. And what is it that you need to provide for your family, right? And so it's making those connections to folks who perhaps climate change is at the top of their list because they're trying to figure out how to put food on the table. They're trying to figure out if their local school is going to close. They're trying to figure out how to access mental health when the mental health clinics in Chicago have been closed, right? And so we have a responsibility to make those connections between the fact that these things are not isolated. They are one and the same because they come from the same root problem, right, that is inherently happening in our cities. And so it's very important for folks to understand that if you're not talking about racial justice and economic justice as part of climate justice, then you're just talking about veganism, right? Then you're just talking about being a vegetarian, right? You're not really talking about fundamentally what the inherent problems in our society are. And it's important for us to ensure that when you're lifting up wanting to do climate change, there also has to be solidarity with wanting economic justice. There also has to be solidarity with the fact that Black lives do matter, right? And so those actions are difficult. They're very difficult because they cause us to have to inherently look in and ask ourselves, what do I believe? Right? And what are the shifts and the teachings and the knowledge that I have to gain to change my perspective? And that's hard work. And as organizers, we have to be committed to caring for that hard work and doing that hard work with our community members to ensure that they're able to land in a good space about how they see the problem, but then how to fix the problem that is as well.
Thanks so much. And let me turn to you, Dan. I know you've had experience on the ground with this as well. And I heard when you were talking about the various dioceses who are working on this, obviously they seem to take quite a number of steps to try to make sure they brought their communities together on this. Can you talk about that a little bit and also about how to create a sense of urgency on this issue in places where maybe there isn't that sense of urgency?
Yeah, well, I think the good news here is that a lot of the things that we need to do, and I'm speaking particularly about the climate crisis. I know there are other environmental questions at play here, but the things that we need to do are actually good things to do. I'll just tell a quick story. One of the first projects that our Catholic Energies team did was a lighting retrofit and a boiler replacement for a parish. And the payback periods could probably like 7 years, but they're paying both of those things back primarily through the savings. So they're not really out any money. And the administrator of that particular parish was the one that we were mostly engaged with on this project. And we completed the project, and all of a sudden he found out that this was from this organization called Catholic Climate Covenant. And he said, if I had known this was about climate change, I would have never done it. So, it was just a bit of a stunning statement, the fact that we actually helped the parish clean the air, reduce their energy costs, got them new equipment, all of these great things. And yet, because it's related to what he saw as climate change, it wasn't, what he wanted. I think we have to have a lot more conversations with people about this. I think we have to get to the core of what do they value? Is it their family? Is it their children, their grandchildren? Is it their health? Is it their pocketbook? How can we help people save money? All of these things are interrelated, and when you get to those kind of core values, I think with people, then you can step into a larger conversation around climate change. But I think the biggest thing is just we got to have conversations, serious conversations, grown-up conversations about these issues, and I think we'll be okay. But we have to start those conversations.
Thanks so much, Dan. Now I'd like to turn to Cardinal Turkson and then you, Christiana. We have a number of questions from Africa and about Africa. And so I'd like to ask, first of all, as part of that, how has Laudato Si been implemented in the church in Africa, especially in West Africa? And what efforts are being made to pass this message along to church members there? And also, what is the position of the Catholic Church on eco-justice in terms of the relationship between rich nations and poorer nations, between those that pollute and those that are suffering from that pollution? If you could both talk about that, I'd appreciate it. And let's start with you, Cardinal Turkson.
And how many minutes I got for that? No, it's this. Now, several parishes happily are doing this. And a clear sign is since last week when we held with Global Catholic Climate Movement, identify a Laudato Si week. We've got reports of several dioceses in Africa holding meetings and discussions as their way of celebrating the Laudato Si week. In a very more concrete way, it's also come up in several ways. I was in Zambia at the instance of the Bishops' Conference, and their dialogue with a mining company about the impact, the challenges of mining industry and their environment. You know, the biggest problem in several African countries is that democratic governance means that almost every 4 years a government changes. And every government who comes to power tries to build up its economy by granting a lot of concessions to mining companies and all of that to do business so they can get monies. So a local chief in Zambia comes to me, he pulls up his mobile phone with a map of Zambia and shows me how much of Zambia's territory, land surface, is already been given out. And it's about 5/8 of the country is already been given out in concession to mining companies to come and do business. So it's only 3/8 of the country which is kind of left free. This ties in with a news item that every now and then we hear about land grabbing taking place in Africa, about foreign industries and companies coming and grabbing land and grabbing land and grabbing land. The point is that in the near future, the land on which villages and local population can even grow crops to feed and to nourish themselves may become problematic. So it's a very big challenge, and it's stuff that we're following very closely. The challenges of deforestation, the challenges of mining, the challenges of contamination of water bodies with mercury and other mining tools. These are things that we're following closely. And from over here, although we want to defer to local bishops about a lot of these local issues, but sometimes we cannot help but push local bishops into holding discussions, despite the fact sometimes they're afraid to get to governments and all of that. But being a group from outside, we can sometimes come and provoke a fight and then go away. And that's when we come in, organize and move a conference or something, and break up all of these issues and invite the government to tackle them up front.
Thanks so much for that. And Christiana, I don't want to add more onto your plate, but we just got a great question from a Georgetown student, Sean Doherty, a student of mine. He says, also, I'd love for you to talk about eco-justice and the issues that Cardinal Turkson was just raising as well. But if you could add this on, because I know you've thought about it very deeply this semester. He says, telecommuting and virtual communication have significantly reduced global emissions during the COVID-19 pandemic. And while they may preserve the environment, what dangers does an increasingly virtual world present to our human ecology? Thanks for addressing whatever of the basket of questions are on your call to answer.
You guys, I think we're going to have to turn this into, a short-term course or something instead of a 1-hour conversation. These are wonderful questions. Let me take quickly a response to the eco-justice and questions about African contexts. And to say that, first of all, as a white woman sitting in New York City, I live on the top of a pyramid of privilege in many respects. So I am by no means poised to comment authoritatively on Africa, that massive, diverse continent, ecologically, socially, culturally, and so forth. What I do feel like I can comment on, though, is the extractive capitalist mode of production that facilitates so much of my mode of living and privilege, and that relies upon the exhaustion of resources, both human and natural. And this is a point that is made clear in various parts in Laudato Si, but has really been amplified as a result of the Amazon Synod, and particularly Pope Francis's exhortation, Querida Amazonia, where he speaks in great detail about many of the things that Cardinal Turkson was just mentioning, the ways in which land grabs and corruption and bribery and various kinds of cartels that exclude eco-justice activists and local participation are really, really deleterious to not only the bioregions, but to societies and cultures and lifeways in those places. And so that is an issue in parts of Africa, but also much more broadly around the world, as indicated by the Amazon Synod. Oh, this is a good question, Mr. Sean Doherty. Thank you for asking it about the pandemic, digital communications. And, one of the ways that we are seeing that we are all connected is indeed this fact that you bring up, that global emissions have decreased first in China, now in the US, as various lockdown measures have prevented the kinds of travel and other forms of combustion to which our world is accustomed and on which our economies and societies tend to run. So everything is connected, and a pandemic has caused a decrease in emissions, and in some ways that's a positive outcome looked at from a narrow kind of perspective. But this question of what is being lost as a result of that is really important. And I think that I'm just going to bracket the climate change conversation about that for a moment and speak now as a professor and as someone who is so committed to connecting with other beloved human beings in classrooms and to creating the spaces where participatory conversations can happen, where people can bring their full selves in ways that are not necessarily facilitated digitally. And I think many of us as faculty are trying to figure out, what might that look like if we have to be online in the fall and we begin our conversations in person? We begin our conversations digitally, not in person. Now, I would say that events like this give me a lot of hope that there can be real connection, even two-dimensionally. But there are so many questions about privacy and surveillance, about social isolation, questions about access based on economies and infrastructures. And these are questions that, are distinctive to this particular issue. But if you step back and scale them out for a moment, they're also questions that pertain to other forms of infrastructure and water supply. Who has access? Who gets to make the decisions? In what ways? Who benefits? Who bears the burdens?
Thanks so much for that, Christiana. We're coming to the end of our conversation, and so I want to end with one question for each of you, and it's how we try to end all of these conversations, just to ask, what can we actually do? What can each of us watching this here today do to help respond to environmental challenges and help put Laudato Si into action in our own lives and in our own particular places? Why don't I start with you, Kim?
Thank you so much for that. And just one quick addition for folks to know is in the United States, Chicago actually has not seen a very large decrease in air pollution. And that's because of the amount of truck traffic we have. Chicago gets 1/3 of all US goods through our city. And so we've actually seen more of an increase in air quality issues because of more goods being needed in the United States during the pandemic. So just wanted to lift that up real quick. But in regards to what folks can do, definitely, I think there's a couple of things. I think one is know that communities that are on the front line, of pollution and extraction, know what they are dealing with and know how to fix it. So I think first and foremost, listening to those most impacted and valuing their voice is crucial. I think the other thing too is that folks should definitely familiarize themselves with the Jimenez principles of democratic organizing. Our communities very much have values in which they look at how to organize with other communities and allies. And so it allows folks to be able to come together in a space of value. So I would say definitely for folks to check that out as a way to think about how to approach frontline communities as well. And then lastly, just listening and learning. Again, communities know what's impacting them. They know how to fix it. And really what they need is support, financial, time, and respect of their voice. So I would say that those are some of the fundamental things that folks can do.
Thanks, Kim. How about you, Dan? What can viewers do to carry forward Laudato Si right now?
Time, I could give you a whole bunch of things that you could do to, lifestyle changes, turning your thermostat up or down or whatever. But I want to go back to something that Cardinal Turkson said at the very beginning, and it was his last C, I believe, which was contemplation. And so what I would encourage people to do is to go outside. Go outside and get to a place where there's some nature. I know if you're in a city that could be a little bit more challenging, but look at the diversity of life that's around you. And think about what could be lost if we don't begin to turn this around. And the second place I would encourage you to go to is a power plant or a landfill in your community, if you can get to it, and look at who's living around those. I just want to emphasize what Kim has said. These are the poorest communities living in these places that are really hazardous to their health. and then just come back home and think about what you've seen and let that move you to action.
Thanks, Dan. How about you, Christiana?
Well, my first quick comment is to amplify and underscore everything that Kim said about listening to and supporting the people who are already doing the work on the ground, who know what the realities are. They are the experts. So figure out ways to support those actions, and then that's a most important way of proceeding. The second thing I would say is for people who are really trying to figure out what the issues are, because I study water ethics, and that's been a big part of my work pertaining to Laudato Si, I would say if you don't know where to begin, start figuring out your watershed. Figure out where your water comes from, figure out the water infrastructure related to it, and figure out what downstream social and economic injustice problems obtain there, because water often leads us to other types of challenges and problems.
Thanks so much. Cardinal Turkson, let's end with you. What can each do to help put Laudato Si into action in our own lives?
Well, let me say two quick observations. I mean, if we sum up the message of Laudato Si in what the Pope says, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, let's refer to images of, families. There's nobody who, hearing his or her baby cry, does not leave everything and try to pay attention to the baby crying and to try to stop him or her from crying. If indeed now the poor and the earth are crying to us, then it's almost imperative that we pay attention to the earth, we pay attention to the poor. Try to stop them from crying and try to discover why they're crying and try to meet their needs. This is so very natural. We do this in other situations. Why can we not do that when it is now the earth and all? Incidentally, the COVID-19 virus is cost us dearly. In the US, about 100,000 people dead. It's cost us so very dearly that one doesn't even want to, make any jokes about. But the virus has also kind of taught us a few lessons. In New Delhi, for the first time, you could stay in New Delhi and see the ice and the snow on the top of Himalayas because the atmosphere cleared up. In China, asthmatic patients could come out and breathe more clearly, more easily out there. So as we begin to open up again, why should we not do in such a way that the beauty we gain from this pandemic can be maintained? We talk about sustainable development. To have a situation that creates so very many joblessness means that we've been working with unsustainable structures. And the pandemic has shown us that we should be developing sustainable structures. If one small episode like the virus can throw billions, millions out of work, structure is not sustainable. So there's a lot we can learn from this, and there are so very many things that we can think through and evolve more sustainable structures. We're keeping our atmosphere and the environment healthy, we're keeping our people in job, we're keeping public healthcare systems in place. All of these are things for policies now to take into consideration. Let us rethink all of these and then kind of set new trajectories for dealing with them.
Thank you so much, Cardinal Turkson, and thanks to your colleagues at the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development, for their collaboration and your collaboration on this online public dialogue. I want to thank all of you for joining us here today for this remarkable conversation. The recording will be available on our website and on our social media channels for later viewing. We want to thank our partners at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, Optimum Audio, AI Media, for all helping us with the technical end of this discussion. And I want to personally thank my colleagues, John Carr and Anna Misla, for doing so much to bring this together. And finally, let me tell you about one conversation that we have coming up. It's our Latino Leaders Gathering. It'll be online, as always, this spring. It's on Faith, Family, Community, Latino Leaders on Faith Through the Crisis, on June 11th from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. More details to be posted on our website soon. Thanks to all of you, and stay well.